Hello and welcome. I am Iris Green, Supervising Attorney for Disability Rights North Carolina. I am also part of the leadership for our disaster recovery team. I have the pleasure of actually starting off this segment today where we're talking about what we do on the disaster recovery team and what we do at Disability Rights North Carolina. And so, what is the disaster recovery team? Our disaster recovery team was born out of our agency monitoring shelters during Hurricane Florence. In September of 2018, 7 of our staff members visited 26 shelters in 47 days. We were able to speak in person with more than 300 people who had evacuated and were displaced. We also were able to speak with over 150 volunteers who were working in the shelters. The conditions that our staff members witnessed included inaccessible shelters, the lack of access to important services and programs within the shelters. Each shelter varied depending on what county you were in. And we also saw the need for trauma-informed training for many of the shelter staff who were developing compassion fatigue. These issues are outlined in a public report we published in February 2019 entitled The Storm After the Storm. And as a result of our publication of our Storm After the Storm report, we received grants from Portlight Strategies, Operation USA, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, the American Red Cross, and the North Carolina Community Foundation to continue our advocacy work in Eastern North Carolina for people with disabilities. What do we do? What is Disability Rights North Carolina, and what do we do? Our essential work at Disability Rights North Carolina include providing information and referrals. We received over 4,000 calls from people with disabilities last year. We also influence public policy, we litigate, we conduct representative payee reviews, and we investigate and we monitor facilities, including shelters where people with disabilities receive services to ensure that their rights are protected and people are free from abuse, discrimination, and neglect. Our access authority is not waived during emergencies, disasters, and pandemics. Civil rights laws are not waived either. And so we are there to remind people to make sure that we enforce the civil rights during this time. We use the Americans with Disabilities Act. We use Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Individuals with Disability Education Act, the McKinney-Vento Act, and other applicable civil rights laws during and after disasters to help people with disabilities recover. People with disabilities, they are disproportionately affected by disasters. Statistics show that children, as well as adults with disabilities and older adults, are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die in a disaster due to a lack of planning, a lack of accessibility, and a lack of accommodation. Most are not due to diagnostic labels or medical conditions, as most people would think. We're also seeing that our long history of segregation and racism in this country also plays out in disasters, complicating and stalling disaster recovery efforts. We are seeing inequities in long-term disaster recovery for many of our clients. Even prior to Hurricane Matthew, Eastern North Carolina had some of the most extreme housing problems in this state due to a lack of affordable housing. When housing is not affordable, people with disabilities are at greater risk of homelessness and forego many life necessities such as food, education, healthcare, and savings just to stay housed. And so avoiding homelessness requires almost all of their available resources to be able to pay rent or a mortgage. And many aspects of their daily lives become more dangerous because they are unable to take care of those other areas. People with disabilities and people with limited income are in dire need of decent, safe, affordable, and accessible housing in North Carolina. And the failure to equitably invest in communities means that people with disabilities, poor people, and people of color are often relegated to neighborhoods that are most vulnerable to flooding and damage that is caused by these disasters. And these are the communities that have the most difficult time recovering. And so when the federal, state, and local systems that are set up to respond don't work well, or don't work in a way that take their issues, and most of them are equitable issues, into account, they not only affect families and communities struggling to recover, what they do, they recreate and they reinforce existing conditions, making recovery from the next disaster even more difficult for them. And so access to our disaster recovery team, access to legal help is vital to helping people with disabilities as they try to put their lives back together after any disaster. One of the things that we focus on the most is preparedness. Preparedness is vital. We put a lot of work into making sure that people are prepared. With the predictions of more frequent hurricanes dumping significant levels of rain in coastal areas in eastern North Carolina, preparation is key. And so we try to help people with disabilities in eastern North Carolina get ahead of problems by helping them understand the importance of the 3 Ps. And the first P is plan. We try to make sure that they chart out a plan that will protect them and get them to safety during a disaster. The second P is prioritize. We try to encourage them to try to decide and gather what they will need to take with them if they have to evacuate. And the third P is partner. We encourage them to identify local partners and networks in addition to focusing on the 3 Ps. We have developed waterproof document protectors with a checklist of suggested preparation items. We have also developed fact sheets as well as a brochure to try to get into the communities and try to educate people about what the rights are and what is the best way to be able to withstand a disaster and become more resilient. During a disaster, we provide real-time assistance with immediate and urgent disaster-related needs. And in the middle of COVID-19, we are conducting virtual community trainings and following with leaders in the community to help them prepare and understand their rights before hurricane season starts on June 1st. We have also convened a leadership academy to train leaders within the community to continue the disaster recovery work if our funding ceases, and so that they will remain connected with us and know who to call if there is a legal issue that Disability Rights North Carolina will need to advocate on their behalf. We are also tracking all of the disaster relief funding that has come into our state from the federal government as well as the North Carolina General Assembly to assist with disaster recovery to ensure that that funding that has been allocated reach the intended beneficiaries. And these are usually highly impacted areas as well as low to moderate income areas. Our goal is to try to be an amplified voice for people with disabilities so that past mistakes are not repeated. And so in our presentation today, you will meet a few of our growing list of partners who work with us on the local, state, and national level to find creative best practices in mitigating the devastating effects that disaster have on citizens with disabilities. You will also meet a client of ours and see some of the work that we're doing in Eastern North Carolina. But next up, you will hear from our Chief Executive Officer, Virginia Knowlton Marcus, about our mission and vision at Disability Rights North Carolina. Here is Virginia.
Our whole house was flooded. Yeah. And then they said, you got to stay inside. They said, you got to stay inside like a shelter.
Okay.
All the shelters were full.
Gotcha.
And we couldn't sleep inside the car. We had to come on back home.
And you've been here ever since?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Virginia Knowlton Marcus. I'm the CEO of Disability Rights North Carolina, and I'm here to tell you about our vision and our values. Our vision statement reads, Disability Rights North Carolina works to achieve a just society where people with disabilities are free from discrimination and abuse. Our goal is a fully integrated and accessible community where people with disabilities have power, equal opportunity, and freedom to make their own decisions. Our values are, we believe that people with disabilities have a right to be heard and the right to live in the world. We increase the power of people with disabilities through advocacy and the relentless pursuit of justice. Disability Rights North Carolina values integrity, creative strategies, and collaboration in our work. We support human dignity, diversity, and civil rights. We fight for full inclusion and self-determination. Taken together, these statements describe a commitment to a movement that is broad and is deep. The issues we work on are rooted in a long history of exclusion, discrimination, and impoverishment. And many of the clients we work with are multiply disadvantaged by various kinds of discrimination and oppression. What we bring to the movement is an expertise in disability rights legal advocacy, and we ally with others who bring other talents and skills to the fight. We're all in this together. Thank you.
At Disability Rights North Carolina, collaboration across service areas has made us stronger in our mission to advance and advocate for people with disabilities in North Carolina, especially during a disaster. We are delighted that we have been invited to work with many organizations like the North Carolina Pro Bono Resource Center for this disaster preparedness presentation and for the upcoming resource fair to provide an array of supports to people in Eastern North Carolina. Our disaster recovery project also gives us the opportunity to collaborate with national organizations like the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies and the World Institute on Disabilities to spearhead the very first North Carolina disability-focused disaster hotline. So in the next segment, you will hear from Cass Sharon, who is the Director of Investigations and Monitoring Team, the Disaster Relief Team, and the Representative Payee Team at Disability Rights North Carolina. She will introduce you to our disaster hotline project. Here is Cass.
Hi everyone, my name is Cass Sharon and I'm the Director of Investigations and Monitoring for Disability Rights North Carolina. Andy asked me to speak for a couple of minutes about the partnerships we've developed to stand up North Carolina's first disaster and disability hotline. It's a project that we're very excited about and was born out of work that we began in the fall of 2018 when we monitored in shelters following the devastation of Hurricane Florence. In these shelters, we found people with disabilities who had many unmet needs that we assisted them with, ranging from needing reasonable accommodations for service animals and durable medical equipment to other issues such as access to medications, quiet rooms, transportation, personal care services, just to name a few. From that work, we realized that we wanted to be able to do more in the future. So we started researching and reaching out to partners and seeking collaborations. From that, we began talking with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. Now, this is an organization that has years of experience both in the United States and internationally, helping people with disabilities during times of disaster. And they had a hotline. So the idea was sprung that we wanted to start one in North Carolina. They have been instrumental in helping us get this hotline ready. They've helped us develop the processes and the infrastructure needed to support this hotline. They are also helping to train our volunteers, using their years of experience successfully advocating for the safety and dignity of disabled people during disaster, focusing on a variety of needs that must be met under the law, and if not required by law, they're necessary for safety, dignity, and survival, and not just in shelters. To develop volunteers, we turned to partnerships with the North Carolina Pro Bono Resource Center and the North Carolina chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. You're meeting a cameo appearance of my cat, Taz, so named for the Tasmanian devil. Both of these groups are recruiting volunteers, social workers, social work interns, as well as lawyers and law interns to help us volunteer and stand up this helpline to help people with disabilities during time of disaster. We've had one in-person training and we're going to have another one at the end of this month. Of course, it's going to be virtual. We're looking very much forward to this training because we want to have this hotline ready and up ready to stand up by June 1st, which is when hurricane season starts. Now, we may not have the hotline moving at that time because it will only be available during times of disaster, but we want to be ready at that time. We also recognize that not every disaster is going to be related to a hurricane in North Carolina, so this hotline will be operational during any disaster, so long as we have the resources to be able to continue its operation. We are so grateful for our partnerships to make this hotline happen, and especially for the volunteers who are willing to devote their time to be trained and to help people with disabilities during time with disaster. Thank you so much for this time with you, and I hope you will all stay safe and well. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Curtis Hill, and I'm a disaster relief advocate with Disability Rights North Carolina. The reason I'm coming to you today is to talk to you about some disaster preparedness resources. But before, let's just center ourselves on why this is such an important topic for people with disabilities. The first thing is that people with disabilities have a difficult time in a normal circumstances. So when a disaster happens, you have to be more prepared than the average person in order so your recovery will be successful. So we're here to talk about some of the resources, and let me explain to you first what the main resource is. The main resource in recovery is your local emergency management, because that person puts in the plans for the preparation for disaster to happen in your community and what things will happen after that occurs. So that's why that is central for what you're doing. They coordinate activities or making sure that the shelters are operational and all those types of things. They coordinate that, and then they coordinate it with the state and the federal level. That's why that person is such a vital person in your recovery process and a resource that you have to have. Because if you need transportation, that's the place that you would call, is that area. You'd call your local emergency management to tell you, well, I need to get picked up because I don't have adequate transportation. So that is the first line that you have. Then the next resource that we have, it's your American Red Cross. That's an important piece of your recovery process, because they're active in the recovery, in the preparation process. They're in the shelters. They're talking to you in the shelters. They're the front lines. Then they have other resources that help you initially when a disaster initially happens. They're doing the feeding programs, the Salvation Army, and all those types of things that they're working together. And that's what it's called the North Carolina VOAD, because that's a resource, because that's where all people in the local long-term recovery groups, they center there and they talk about these major issues, and they plan and think, and they're first responders per se when the disaster happens. Then you have on the federal level, you have FEMA, which is so important. Anytime a disaster happens in your community, you need to make sure that you fill out that FEMA document. Right, because that's important. Because that FEMA document, once you assign it and you're in a disaster area, that opens the door for you to have access to all the resources that the federal government has. Now, whether they deny you or not, it still opens up the door down the road to say that you indeed had a disaster. That's the important piece, because it unlocks all those other resources. Then we have the Legal Aid of North Carolina. They're diligently trying and helping people with the different legal issues that are happening when a disaster happens. And then you have the Centers for Independent Living. They're trying to help people with disabilities live on a regular basis. And then when disaster comes, they're also continually making sure there are no gaps in services and things like that. And then the North Carolina Assistive Technology Program, they're promoting independence for people with disabilities through access to technology to make sure that the technological needs that you might have are present. Then we have Rebuild NC. That is a very important program, because that is the last, when Rebuild NC comes in, they're talking about that's the last step of the disaster recovery process. And that means that they're going to do major construction or those types of things if needed to your home. If your floor has a hole in the floor and those kind of things, they're moving you to a place of completeness or wholeness. So when you get that, you want to make sure that you're applying if you're still having problems accessing it, because this is important that you have that information. Okay? Then we have the United Way. The United Way 211 is important because they have real-time information about what's going on in the community, the resources that are going on in your county. If you need to go to another shelter, they have that information. If you got food insecurities as your recovery, they've got access to that and to connect you to those resources. So it's important that you know what 211 is. And the way you get in contact with them, you just dial 211 on your phone, and that's how you get in contact with them. Then you have your local emergency management. That's so important in disaster. Then you have Ready NC. That's important. ReadyNC.gov, because they have real-time information if I'm evacuating and those type of things. They let me know what the water levels are in my neighborhood, in my community. It lets me know where the shelters are located in my community. I've had an opportunity to share some of the community resources that are instrumental in your recovery process. Thank you again for allowing Disability Rights North Carolina to be a part of this presentation.